If Anthony Katsur were a superhero, he'd be the one saving ad tech from its own bad decisions while juggling privacy chaos, AI madness, and Google's ever-shifting Sandbox like it's just another Tuesday. The CEO of IAB Tech Lab is back on the ADOTAT Show, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Katsur's the guy who knows where all the digital bodies are buried, and he's here to dig them up for us. You've been warned. Things are about to get real.
Deserve to win when it matters most. Facing multi-billion-dollar bet the company litigation? No problem. That's why we're here. Troutman Amin, LLP is a true legal powerhouse.
Welcome back to the ADOTAT Show. I'm your host, Pesach Latz, and today we have got a returning guest who always brings the heat, Anthony Katsur, CEO of IAB Tech Lab. This is the second time we've had him on, and honestly, it's always a good time when Anthony drops in. The guy's been at the heart of digital advertising so long enough to know where all the bodies are buried, from cookies to CTV and everything in between. Last time, we barely scratched the surface of some of the biggest issues in ad tech, so today we're going deeper into the chaos of privacy data and whatever curveball Google is throwing next. Anthony, always glad to have you back. Let's jump in. First of all, how are you feeling today? And congrats on 3 years at the IAB Tech Lab. It's
Thank
like
you.
surviving a few decades in any other industry.
Thank you so much. By the way, I love the new walk-up music. It's fantastic. Like the opener. I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Yeah, I hit 3 years in August, and it's been a hell of a ride. I've said to others in the industry, this may be maybe the most fun gig I've ever had. So,
What has been your biggest, I can't believe this is my job moment?
it's a great question. It's hard to pick out one. I think certainly the privacy sandbox analysis that we did late last year with the report that we released earlier this year, I think was a watershed moment for the tech lab and the industry, candidly. I think that was probably, I can't believe this, I can't believe this. I have those moments pretty frequently, just given the amount of turmoil and churn and opportunity in the industry. So it's everything from, who I'm interacting with to the challenges we're facing. I think some other highlights have been certainly Kara Swisher. Interviewing her earlier this year at Tech Lab Summit was definitely, I can't believe this is my job moment. Scott Galloway several years ago was another, I can't believe this is my job moment. Interacting with government regulators like Ashkan Soltani and California, like those are experiences I'll never forget. So personally, I think those have definitely been some highlights for me.
Are you tired of splitting cookies at family gatherings yet?
Funny, I'm going up to see my mother this weekend for her birthday, and they always ask about the industry. I think they understand cookies. I think they finally grasp cookies, but no, I'll never get tired of it.
Speaking of the cookies, the cookie apocalypse, Google's played chicken with the industry. Every time we finally think they're pulling the plug, they hit us with another delay. And now it looks like they're not getting rid of them at all. Let's be real. At this point, do you just roll your eyes every time they say something?
No, I don't. I think what Google's attempting to do is incredibly difficult. And even though our assessment of the sandbox was highly critical, and the fact that it didn't support key advertising use cases and would likely result in revenue loss to publishers, I still think what they're doing is really difficult. And, they're also enmeshed with regulators. In this case, it's the CMA in the UK that wants to make sure that any move forward to deprecate the cookie and provide an alternative solution continues to support a thriving and competitive digital ad economy. So I don't roll my eyes. I think they're in a tough spot. I think what they're trying to do is difficult. They're dealing with regulatory pressures. They're dealing with privacy pressures as well. That said, I think the cookie is on its last legs. Not that I fault the cookie for the privacy issues we've had as an industry. I think I first said this on your original podcast when we spoke, like, blaming the cookie for privacy lapses in digital advertising is like blaming the car for the drunk driving accident. I think the cookie's been abused. I think it's been abused. And in some cases, I think there's been a lot of false promises around the cookie. That doesn't mean the cookie should be deprecated. However, I think, look, Apple, Mozilla, other browser vendors have already yanked the third-party cookie. So we could argue that roughly 50% of the industry 50% of addressable browser-based traffic doesn't have a cookie today. I think it's only a matter of time before the cookie is eventually deprecated throughout. So we need to move on. And
for dusty old-school TV ads when you could be turning heads with Origin. Imagine zero-code solutions that make setting up your CTV campaigns faster than a double espresso shot. Origin brings dynamic, captivating ads in the living room and outside the home, with ad formats designed to grab eyeballs and stop thumbs from scrolling. Origin isn't just about reach, it's about results. Like a jaw-dropping 883% lift in viewer attention. Don't just get noticed, get remembered. Visit originmedia.tv and start your ad revolution today.
So you've been a huge advocate for the global privacy platform and helping the industry embrace privacy standards. So let's be honest, how many people are actually on board and how many are just hoping the regulators get bored and move on?
Wow. We're up to the multiple, I don't have an exact count at this moment. We're up to the multiple dozens of companies that have adopted the global privacy platform at this point. Some very large publishers, some very large ad tech companies have adopted it, are supporting it. So companies are actually doing it. In terms of hoping regulators go away when it comes to matters of privacy and digital advertising, I don't think anyone is under the illusion that regulators are just gonna move on. We're in the very early days of a new privacy regime, not just in the US, but globally. It all started with GDPR. It's now moved into the US on a state level basis. One would argue California probably has one of the more progressive laws in the comprehensive regulations coming to the Indian market, largest country in the world, huge market, huge advertising economy there. I think we're in the early days. I don't think anyone is under the illusion that the regulators are just going to forget about this anytime soon.
So what's the main excuse you hear? Is it just too expensive?
To adopt things like the GPP? No, it's not too expensive. Part of it is just companies fitting it into their roadmap. A lot of it is just getting it slotted into the roadmap and spending the engineering and product times to get the GPP integrated. It also comes down to the discussions over whether you are going to support state level strings, so specific to each state, or you are going to support the national privacy string. In order to support the national privacy string, we are mandating that you be a multi-state privacy agreement signatory, which is a springing contract that stitches together all the local state laws together, and you are effectively attesting that you're in compliance with all those state laws. So not every company feels comfortable with signing the MSPA, the multi-state privacy agreement, to use the national string, so they can use the state level string. So I think it's a combination of fitting it into the roadmap, so having the resources to get it deployed. And then if you want to use the national privacy string, doing the legal assessment of the multi-state privacy agreement to leverage the national string. So I think it's a combination of kind of legal assessment and analysis and then actual engineering and product resources to get it deployed.
So moving on, zero-party data is being hailed as the shiny new answer to the cookie apocalypse. But are people really willing to share their info directly, or is this just the ad tech industry dressing up data collection in a friendlier package?
No, I mean, I've always had questions around the term zero-party data, and I understand how the industry has framed it and others have framed it as it's a consumer, knowingly and freely, handing their data over in exchange for some value. Again, whether that's entertainment, information, research, whatever, news, whatever. I still think of that as first-party data.
Are we just making up new terms so we can have something to talk about at conferences?
I've always thought in my mind, there's first-party data and then there's third-party data. Full stop. Whether consumers should be aware of when they're handing over their data. Notice and consent are I think, cornerstones around privacy, consumer privacy. Then things like data security and de-identification come into play further down the value chain. But I think it depends on how you phrase the question to consumers. I think consumers are smarter than we're giving them credit for, and I think a lot of them do realize there is a value exchange here, right? I am going to hand over some form of information about myself, whether it's the context on the pages I'm viewing on a publisher website, whether it's my email address, phone number, home address, etc., in exchange for free or cost-effective or cheap content, news, information, entertainment, research, what have you. I think consumers inherently know. In fact, there is the IAB, and this is public. Feel free to take a look at it. There is the IAB publication around the U.S. state of data, where there were myriad questions asked to consumers in different forms, where I would say the big takeaway for me when I read that report from the IAB was that I think consumers realize what they're trading in exchange for, again, free or heavily subsidized content. So yeah, I think some people are willing to give up certain amounts of information about themselves in exchange for that.
Yeah, I kind of feel like first-party data is like the prom queen, but the reality is she can't do everything we hoped. And what's the real deal here?
we have always advocated that the replacement for the third party cookie is going to require a portfolio approach. First party data is only going to scale so much, and candidly, I think it's only going to scale so much again with large media companies as well as larger advertisers, right? So I don't think there's a singular replacement for the third party cookie. I think it's going to require a portfolio approach of explicit high fidelity first party data like a hashed email address, potentially IP address while that's still around, or synthetic identifiers. But those alone, I don't think those would replace the ubiquity that the third party cookie brought to the table. So I think, it's going to require a blend of contextual, aggregated cohort-based audience models, synthetic identifiers, hashed encrypted, first-party signals like email address, IP address, phone number, home address. I don't think there's no.
So if we could look 3 years in the future at the IAB Tech Lab, are we going to eventually conquer identity privacy?
I think we're looking. I don't know if it's a 3-year horizon. I think it's probably somewhere between 5 to 10. Again, state laws are still coming onto the books. There is no U.S. federal privacy law to date. I think we can anticipate one sometime in the future. When, I think it's anyone's guess. And again, evolving privacy regulations in other jurisdictions around the world. I mentioned India or Australia has a robust privacy law. Brazil has a robust privacy law. Europe continues to evolve. The UK continues to evolve. I think some of the work that the ICO has done as a government entity, I think they are incredibly forward thinking when it comes to consumer privacy and data security. One of the best papers I've read on pets this year was published by the UK ICO, by a government entity. So I think we're fixing this or addressing this for the next 5 to 7 years. When it comes to data issues, they're around things like data quality. There are data quality. Not all data is created equal in our ecosystem. There are data quality issues. Some data is better than others. And there are solves in place. I think what's frustrating to me is that we've introduced things like the data transparency standard and the data label and a whole compliance program around data quality 2.5 years ago, but adoption has been so weak that's been a really frustrating issue for us at the Tech Lab, because then I read articles about data quality being a challenge, and it's like, we've had a data provenance program or a data provenance framework in place for 2.5 years.
How does that work? Do you grade data? Like, this is A data and this is B data, kind of like meat?
We effectively publish the data provenance around certain data sets, whether that's first party data from a publisher or whether you are a third party data broker. What was the signal, right? Data provenance, I think, is going to be a key topic in 2025 and beyond. We've already seen it. We've seen issues around ID provenance, like with the recent ID bridging issues, which we're about to issue the update to RTB to address the ID bridging issues we experienced earlier this year. But I think data provenance, all of your listeners should read up on that and lock that term into their head, because I think that's going to become a key issue in 2025 and beyond. What went into the actual creation of a new homeowner, right? How often do you refresh that data? What were your data sources around defining a new homeowner? And how we do that is we effectively create a data label. So think of it as like, it's no different than if you're at the grocery store and you're looking at the nutrition label of some product you're looking to buy at the grocery store. Same thing with our data transparency standard. We provide a data label saying, this is what went into this company's definition of a new homeowner. Buyer, do you agree with that? Here's how often they refresh that data set. And so there are solves here that we do the audit. Tech Lab does the audit on these things, and we publish that data label for the industry to read, to look at. No different than a nutrition label on food.
Very interesting. So moving on to CTV, it's the hottest new thing in ad tech. It's starting to feel a little bit like the Wild West out there. No rules. Everyone's figuring it out as they go. How are you in the Tech Lab wrangling this chaos? And what's the end game for CTV advertising? I like to say that CTV is like the toddler with too much sugar, tons of energy, but no one really knows how to control it.
Is the final front. I've always felt that TV, heavy air quotes around TV, is the final frontier for our ecosystem. It's like space, right? And it is a bit of the Wild West. And I think some of the key challenges are, creative formats, no clear definition around creative formats, no clear technical standards around creative formats. Like, what makes a pause ad? What makes a buck? What makes a squeeze down? And what are the technical standards that go into ensuring those are executed in a technically standardized way? That's challenge one. So you've got creative formats. That's one key challenge. Another key challenge is I have firmly held the belief for a number of years now, very publicly, that I think some people in the industry look at television versus streaming as a zero-sum game. As linear viewership continues to decline and more folks go to streaming wins to linear's detriment. I see a world of convergence where I believe advertisers are less concerned about the technical environment, like cable, satellite, rabbit ears, or streamed. They just want to get their brand in front of the right people on that big flat screen we all have on our walls, no matter how it was delivered. Like, I think they're less concerned about the delivery environment. And they're like, how do I just get cross-environment, cross-screen measurement? That's another huge, huge, huge challenge we face in an industry. Another challenge is there's no real standardization around, there's no like taxonomy data around ACR data. So ACR data is all over the place, and there's no technical standards. Companies are trying to synthesize very non-normalized, fragmented data sets. That's a whole other issue. There's other issues around, common currency around audiences. My definition or the token I'm using to define, a new homeowner may be different than what the CTV player may be defining as a new homeowner. So you get these mismatches. You'll get kind of audience discrepancy. So yeah, there's a lot there to unpack. And I think part of the reason it is very Wild West, and I think part of that reason is I think your analogy of toddler on sugar is spot on, is the fact that it's such a hyper growth channel right now for the ecosystem as streaming continues to take off. So there's a ton of work we're doing there. We released the Ad Creative ID framework to effectively synthesize various creative ID solutions in various regions. Let's start there. If we can get a consistent pull on creative ID, whether it's Ad ID here in North America or ClearCast in the UK, at last count, I think we have discovered there's 14 different creative ID frameworks globally. If we can at least start to synthesize that and have a consistent creative ID appear across streaming platforms and linear, now you've started the first step to kind of universal reconciliation across screens and across streamers. Just within streaming, there's fragmentation, but even across linear, there's some fragmentation. So the ASIF, or the Ad Creative ID framework, is our first step there to do that. We are launching Ad Format Idle later this year. This is hot off the press, a sneak preview to all your listeners. We're launching Ad Format Idle later this year to synthesize with the industry a standardized list of creative formats, the technical standards that go into those creative formats, some of the challenges I was mentioning before. So those are two key initiatives. And then our Advanced TV Commit Group, we are continuing to look at the opportunity to create some sort of standardized watermarking or signaling framework across linear and streaming, so you can have some form of universal reconciliation for brands. So
what is the Open Measurement SDK for CTV?
So the Open Measurement SDK for CTV, the OMSDK in short, was originally born out of it was Mark Pritchard from P&G that was on stage at ALM. I think I want to say 2017. It was in Florida. I was there, and he got on stage and said, viewability needs to be solved, and until it's solved, those that don't have it figured out by the end of the year will not get P&G budget. Well, lo and behold, shocking, the industry figured out a viewability standard by the end of the year. But again, the issue around that was a lack of normalized data sets. Like, how do we all come together as an industry and agree, okay, this is a normalized data set or a normalized form of measurement around viewability. That was the creation of the original. That's now been, that now operates across over, I think it's almost 160 different apps and platforms across the globe. The OMSDK probably shows up on about 3 billion devices at this point. And there's nothing privacy related that gets passed into that. It's just purely viewability measurement data, and then it gets normalized at the OMSDK. That started in the mobile ecosystem, mobile app, mobile web. We then brought it to traditional web, your browser environment, and we've now launched it for CTV. So you now get cross-environment normalization of viewability data across all environments But the unique difference that the OM SDK brings for CTV is we detect things like, is the television on? There's been issues where you've had the device plugged in, whether it's the brick or the stick plugged into your television, but the TV's off, but the stick is still streaming. So detecting whether the TV is on is a key one. Detecting zombie televisions, like has the consumer interacted with the TV in the last hour or 2 hours? If they haven't, there's probably no one in the room, or you may have left it on for your dog. I know my dog right now is at home watching ESPN. She loves ESPN. But that's what the OM SDK does in a nutshell. It normalizes viewability across all environments. The OM SDK specifically for CTV further detects, is someone in the room? Is the television on or off?
Is there anything else shocking we found, like how little people are actually looking at ads?
No, it doesn't. No, because you can't really detect if someone looked at an ad in television. Like, it doesn't detect, like, if the commercial break went, did I run to the kitchen to make a cup of tea? It doesn't detect that. Are you still interacting with the television set? Yes or no?
Has there been any talk of using cameras to see if people are there?
There are companies in the industry that are doing more, whether it's cameras or they're linking your television device to your mobile device to determine if you're in the room, or QR code interactions. There are other companies that are innovating to detect if someone's actively engaged with the television viewing environment.
So viewers seem to care less about how advanced the tech is and more about whether they can skip the ads. How do you keep the viewers engaged without making them want to throw their remote at the screen? I mean, let's be real. Nobody wants to watch ads.
Well, sure. Well, I don't know about that. No one wants to watch ads to a certain price point.
Well, I guess if they're relevant, if you're looking for a new bike and it shows up, yeah.
Sure. If they're
It's always been the argument, relevant ads work better.
Of course. I mean, if they're relevant and they are appropriately frequency capped, right? I certainly don't want to see the same creative a ton of times during a program. I also probably don't want to see the same brand a ton of times during a program, right? So I think relevant creative that is appropriately frequency capped, I think consumers will tolerate that. Sure, advertising is an inherently a disruptive and interruptive experience to consumers, right? Whether it's a full page ad in the paper as you're going through the paper, for those of you that still read it, or whether it's a traditional television spot, like it breaks the content. That break in the content is what pays for or heavily subsidizes the content you're ingesting. So I think it goes back to the conversation with the consumer of, I think if you look at, some of the information that Netflix has released, as well as some of the other traditional subscription-based streamers, there is a threshold where consumers will say, yeah, I'm not going to pay for this next tier of no ads. Let's keep the price point down here, and I'll take the advertising.
AI is the boogeyman for some, the messiah for others, especially in ad tech. Do you think AI is going to steal our jobs, or is it just another overhyped tool that is going to make us all better at what we do?
I think AI is definitely going to disrupt multiple job markets, multiple industries, not just us. So yeah, I think is it going to take all of our jobs? No. Is it going to disrupt certain roles? Probably in things like analytics. Perhaps, there is certainly going to be disruption. Don't think the reality is caught up with the hype cycle. That said, I think we are very early days of AI. I would argue this even on a societal level. I think we're in the very early days of AI. To apply that to our ecosystem, maybe the first pitch has been thrown, to use a baseball analogy, maybe not. I do think it's going to change. I do think you're going to see huge impacts in the areas of contextual and relevance. I think AI could probably do a much better job of understanding context of a media environment. I think dynamic creative powered by AI, I think, is also low-hanging fruit. I think those are two things that immediately jump out to me, is in the area of creative and the ability to better automate contextual relevance, context.
There's a lot of concern about AI bias, also the potential to perpetuate harmful stereotypes and targeting. How real is this threat? And is there anything we can do about it?
I think it's an issue. Yeah, I think it's certainly a concern. I think anywhere we can have open AI models, effectively open sourced AI models where the code is available for inspection by all, I think it is a key area to combat AI bias, right? The code is laid bare for all to see. Others can go and inspect it and call out algorithms for perhaps an inherent bias. So I think transparency within AI, transparency within the actual algorithm and the best way to do that is through open source frameworks. I think that's a key starting point for the industry. I think constant test and learning to test for bias, I think, is another key starting point for all forms.
Have you seen any dangerous assumptions that AI has made about people?
I personally have not. I mean, I've read some of the trades. I personally have not seen anything like that, and not in our.
What have you heard in the trades?
I mean, there were issues. There were issues in the early days of Gemini AI's launch that were all over social media. More not necessarily ad related, but I think contextually and content related. I think there have been some.
I remember, what was it like? All Mexicans were wearing sombreros.
No,
I think that was one of them. Like they I think it was originally like Mid-Journey. Whenever you typed in you wanted like someone who's Mexican, they stuck a sombrero on the person. Every single time. Yeah, like every Mexican wears a sombrero.
Yeah, things. Yeah, stereotypes of that nature for sure. Yeah.
So, what do you think the most unappreciated use of AI and ad tech is right now? Is there something big on the horizon that no one's paying attention to?
Underappreciated. I go back to dynamic creative. I think that's a use case that's just screaming for AI to be applied to it. And I am sure there are Tech Lab members and listeners right now that are working on that. I think that's just incredible low-hanging fruit. The contextual use case, I think, is an underappreciated use of AI. I think applying AI to content for contextual analysis, contextual relevance. I don't think enough people are paying attention to those things. But I also know there are companies. In fact, there's a company based out of Finland. The name eludes me at this very moment. That's doing exactly that. They're using AI to apply effectively context scoring to various forms of content. I forget the name of the company off the top of my head.
So do you have a big, bold prediction about the future of AI in the next 5 years in the ad tech industry?
I mean, I would say in the digital media industry, sure. I think we as an ecosystem, and we're looking closely at this at the Tech Lab, and I don't have answers yet. I wish I did. But it's something that we're looking at the Tech Lab board level. We do have the first ever subcommittee created at the Tech Lab board level. I think we've got to watch out for publishers and publishers' intellectual property. I do have concerns with LLMs and them locking publishers without proper compensation or notice or some form of contractual agreement to scrape that content. So while I think contracts are great and agreements are great with those publishers, I do think we need some technical frameworks that enforce those contracts. So I think protection of media companies who already have a ton on their plate already, I think, is first and foremost for me. Bold prediction, I think AI has actually very positive implications around privacy in our ecosystem. The ability to apply AI to data sets as potentially an uber and advanced form of like a privacy enhancing technology and build very rich, aggregate anonymized cohort or lookalike models, and the ability to target and attribute to those, I think is potentially a really powerful use of AI over the next several years. So, I mean, there are certainly privacy concerns on a societal level when it comes to AI, but I think there are also potentially immense privacy improving opportunities when it comes to AI, particularly in our ecosystem.
Switching gears a little bit, if you were stranded on a desert island, 5 people you bring along, I'm guessing it's a mix of practical survivalists and people who can keep things entertaining.
I mean, 5 people? This one's a tricky one. I mean,
we've had like 5 guests say Bear Grylls.
I immediately thought of that, but I figured that was probably the most common answer. Robert Plant, John Bonham, John Paul Jones, and Jimmy Page. I need to be entertained. I need music. So why not bring the greatest 4 to assemble a band of all time onto the island? I like to tinker.
And it's margaritas all day?
Well, that's the question. Is the 5th person a bartender, or is it more like a civil engineer? Probably more like a civil engineer that can help me develop the island. I'm a bit of a tinkerer and a handyman myself. So
you're not going to try to. No one to try to escape. You're just going to stay there.
So I don't know if I can necessarily bank on help coming. So yeah, I would say the 4 members of Led Zeppelin and probably some astute mechanical or civil engineer to support me in building a civilization on the island. We have to build a stage first. So
you mentioned transparency, integrity, innovation as key values. How do these shape the kind of businesses that you would want to build if you were building, especially in an industry that often feels like it's more about the next shiny thing?
I mean, those are, I think, transparency, integrity, innovation, grit. Those are things that I look for when we're interviewing for tech lab candidates. The reason those four are important to me is that I think any trade organization needs to be highly transparent with its members, with the industry. I think that's important. I think we need to maintain the highest levels of integrity as well, right? We represent the industry, not one single company, big and small, publisher and advertiser, agency and ad tech company. So integrity is key. Innovation, I think, is at the core of what we do. We innovate these open technical standards, these open technical frameworks and guidelines to drive the industry forward. And I think we drive the industry forward in three ways. We either help drive growth, we help mitigate risk, or we help discover or create efficiencies in the ecosystem. So we're either driving top line, we're driving margin, and we're helping the industry to avoid risk. Important because the tech lab can be a rather thankless job. Someone is always upset with us. Most are very pleased with us, but we can't please everyone. So some working group sessions and some meetings result in very difficult conversations. And some of our working group members can be pretty tough on us, rightly so at times, right? They demand the best out of us that we can deliver. So I think grit's another key thing to interview for, which is a hard quality to interview for.
So you've been around a lot of big names in the industry. Do you have a Yoda who taught you the ropes, and what's the most valuable lesson that you've learned?
I've learned a lot from a lot of people in the industry. It would be hard for me to call out a single individual that I've learned from. I mean, yeah, if I were ever to win an Academy Award for the digital advertising ecosystem, I'd be on stage way too long. The band would start to play. There's a lot of folks that I would have to thank, for whether it's agency executives that taught me in a meeting the fundamentals of media buying, or managers or leaders that taught me greater patience, or other technical peers that opened my eyes to new technologies and new ways of thinking around innovation. It's a huge list. Like, I think long and hard about that question, and I was like, I don't want to cop out, but like, there's a lot of people that I've learned a lot from in this ecosystem, and I'm still learning. I don't know everything. Hardly.
What's some Yoda wisdom that you pass on to other people? You just learn it the hard way.
No, a phrase that someone said to me a long time ago is, just because you're correct doesn't mean you're right.
What does that mean to you?
What it means to me is that even if you are fundamentally correct in thinking about something, if the rest of the room, or in this case the industry, doesn't think that way, it doesn't mean it's gonna go the way you wanted it to.
We're trying to teach one of our kids that yesterday. He kept on arguing with his teacher, and the teacher was saying to him, "Why do you keep on talking?" And he said, "Because you keep on talking." And she was like, "Well, you can stop." And he said, "Why?" We got a phone call from the teacher.
Yeah, that's
he was technically right, but
right. Like that's been a big one. I think communication style is not just our industry. I think any business environment. I think being approachability. Many who know me, I'm a pretty big guy, right? So like, I can be inherently physically intimidating. So I think being conscious of how approachable I am, managing my communication style accordingly.
How tall are you?
6'5". Yeah,
you weren't joking.
I think communication style is another key thing that I've learned over the years from various leaders. Going back to, you can be correct doesn't mean you're right. I think finding compromise, I think, is also an important thing. If we want to move things forward, like perfect being the enemy of the good, sometimes we don't get perfect, even in some of the standards we want to release, or even in what we aspire to do at the tech lab, or what I aspire to do at the tech lab. Doesn't mean we always get it perfect, but we get something out there. Like, we have to start with that first step.
You see a lot of trends come and go. What is one idea that everyone in the industry gets wrong? Like something that people keep on repeating, and you want to scream, "No, that's not really how it works."
I think there are still a lot of assumptions in the industry around the future of privacy and addressability. There is single comprehensive solution. I think moving on from the cookie, moving on from certain third-party data assets. I don't know if the industry really appreciates the journey that we're all on right now when it comes to the future of identity, addressability, and privacy compliance. I would say it's the greatest challenge this ecosystem's ever faced. And again, whether that is the work that Apple has done in their ecosystem or Chrome's privacy sandbox, to government regulation across the globe and compliance with that, like, laws on the books or pending laws on the books. I don't think the industry quite grasps the heavy lift that we're facing over the next several years.
As you look ahead, what's the legacy you want to leave in the industry? Are you aiming to be remembered as the guy who saved ad tech, or just someone who kept pushing for transparency and innovation in a world that often resisted it?
I want to be remembered for being transparent, doing the right thing for the ecosystem. Even if it upset some, it pushed the industry forward. I want to be remembered as the guy that left the industry better than I found it. I want to be remembered as the guy that truly innovated on behalf of the industry. One of my goals when I joined Tech Lab was Tech Lab needed to move faster. Candidly, like Tech Lab, in my opinion, wasn't moving fast enough, and I think we've done that. I think we've in the last 3 years we have moved much more aggressively in terms of establishing new standards and being current, and in some cases being ahead of the market. I don't know if Tech Lab was necessarily all of those things. In some areas, I think they were, but I don't necessarily think. I'm constantly reminding the team that we've got to think 5 years out. Like, we're in strat planning right now. We have to think 5 years out. Anything we're doing today, we have to think 5 years out. So yeah, I'd love to be remembered for being innovative, for being gritty and determined around certain standards and things that we're thinking strategically, remaining relevant, driving the industry forward. Like, those are things I want to be remembered for.
So I have a new question that I'm going to end the show with now, and you get to be the guinea pig for it. When have you grown the most in your life? And what caused that growth?
Oh, personally or professionally?
Personally and professionally.
Personally, birth of my son.
Why is that?
You're now responsible for this other little human being, and I had my son, a bit later than most people. You realize it's not about you anymore. I think having kids.
How old is he now?
He's 12 now. I think having kids teach you a fair amount of humility. I think
right.
they teach you humility. I think they teach you to not be selfish. That has been, and he's a joy. I absolutely love my time with my boy. I absolutely do. So it's this weird blend of like escapism, in the eyes of my son, spending time with him, you can kind of escape the world a bit. But I think there's a lot of lessons we can learn from our children, and of course, and vice versa.
I said too soon.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Professionally, what was transformative for me professionally? Boy, it may be taking this role. I think maybe taking this role as a CEO of the Tech Lab it's given me. I've worked in this industry a long time, but it's definitely given me a different perspective, and I think a certain amount of empathy to all the different actors in our ecosystem, and what they're trying to accomplish. I think this industry gets knocked about more than frankly it deserves. I think most people in this ecosystem want to do the right thing. Every industry has bad actors, every single one. Finance, energy, telecom, and ours. But I feel like we focus more on the negative than the good, where I think most people want to do the right thing. And I think some sectors are more unfairly singled out than others. I think the ad tech ecosystem is the easy kind of finger to point at, where it takes an ecosystem. It's not just ad tech did that. It's like, well, there are other companies that use ad tech. So I think ad tech gets singled out unfairly. So I think this role has taught me, really empathy for what we're trying to accomplish as an ecosystem. And I do think a lot of folks believe that the work that they do does keep the internet cost effective and in some cases free. I know that's cliche, but I think a lot of people really believe that. I do. I don't want to pay. I don't want to have a subscription to every single form of content on the internet. I don't want to have a reg wall for every single form of content on the internet. That's not healthy. Yeah, I think this role has certainly been a transformative experience.
Are we going to get you to dance, huh?
I'm terrible dancer.
A massive thank you to Anthony Katsur, who just schooled us on everything from the slow death of cookies to the untamed frontier that is CTV. We dove deep into Google's privacy sandbox drama and why AI is both our greatest tool and maybe, just maybe, the job thief lurking around the corner. seriously, this episode was packed. Now let's give it up for our sponsors. Troutman Amin, the legal heavyweights you want in your corner when you're facing high-stakes litigation or navigating compliance nightmares. And OriginMedia.tv, the team transforming CTV campaigns into precision marketing with their game-changing slingshot tech. Thanks for watching, and remember, stay bold, stay curious, and know more than you did yesterday.